This edition of the Ridley Report is brought to you by supporters of the Libertarian Enterprise at NCC-1776.org. It's the online magazine that started it all. It's the Libertarian Enterprise, birthplace of the Free State Project. Home to 13 years of archives, cartoons, and up-to-date commentary. From the cutting-edge minds in free market thought. NCC-1776.org. They've already started one revolution. Who knows what their next article will accomplish? NCC-1776.org. The prosecutor repeatedly referred to Lauren as Lauren Canaro. Oh, and Commander Therian did eventually say something to the effect that he thought we were sort of like constitutionalists or libertarians, but he conceded that he wouldn't be the best person to define us. Lauren took the stand to question Therian, and before she went up, there was a slide on this projector that was sort of putting out this image of an eagle all over the courtroom. Or at least on these screens up there. So Lauren just removed it and replaced it with a handwritten message that said, "Where is the victim?" She asked Therian if anyone had been hurt. He said no one was physically hurt. There were no objections from the prosecutor at that point. There are actually few objections from the prosecutor during the whole trial, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Another man, Inspector Scott Meller, took the stand. And also, going back to Therian, I think Therian made a big deal out of the fact that Lauren and Kat would not leave when asked to. And he said that he made repeated requests and gave them a sort of countdown, like if you're not out of here within a minute, then you'll be arrested, that sort of thing. It's interesting that when Therian was on the stand and they asked him to describe how many people were there, he said there were 10 of us there. Well, of course, I wasn't there that day, but there were 10 people there. And then, but then when Meller took the stand, they asked him how many people were there, and he said it was a, quote, large group. So I guess all we have to do is turn out 10 people, and they'll feel like they're being confronted by a large group. That means doesn't require much effort to get their attention. They brought up, I guess, a charge of disorderly conduct, I think. And they focused pretty heavily on Lauren's refusal to. They made a big deal out of her exercising of her right to remain silent. They were wanting to know why. They were talking about how she wouldn't give out her personal information when asked for it. I guess they really don't like that right to remain silent very much. But yeah, it seemed like the two charges they were saying that the charges were disorderly conduct and failure to comply. I'm not sure because I've heard it referred to as failure to appear and failure to obey. But I'm just hearing all these different phrases thrown around. Some of the people, I guess both Meller and this female officer who testified, Rachel Lepre, both managed to really badly botch the constitutional questions that they were asked by Lauren. One of them, Lepre, basically said that the Second Amendment was the one that she got it confused with the First Amendment, and seemed to say it was the right to peaceably assemble and the right to free speech was the Second Amendment. Officer Meller said at first he wasn't sure he had taken an oath to the Constitution, and then when Lauren quoted part of the oath, he said basically, "Oh yes, I do remember that. Now I did take an oath to that," but he didn't know anything about the First Amendment either. There seemed to be conflicting stories between these three, at least. Well, between I guess there were 4 Homeland Security officers that testified, but there seemed to be conflicting stories between them as to whether there were customers in the IRS office or not. By the way, the prosecutor's name is Robert Cancella, and I didn't get that immediately, so I kept trying to get his attention and ask him, after the trial, what his name was. When I finally got around to asking him, he looked disturbed, and he said, "What's your name? Who are you?" And I just said, "I'm Dave Ridley with Ridley Report. I just want your name so I can report who the prosecutor is," and then he gave it to me. Throughout the trial, Lauren's supporters, repeatedly laughed. There was, a fair amount of talking going on, although I didn't really notice that. It didn't disturb me in my attempts to listen to the proceedings. But some folks pointed out that there was quite a bit of chatter going on in the crowd. The judge didn't really try to interfere with that very much. By the way, this is it's a magistrate, Judge Muirhead, presiding. During, of course, most of the trial, Muirhead was pretty quiet, but he, as he has in the past, came off as being very human, not a robot. He may be doing some robotic things, but he certainly responded to a lot of questions, and I'll get to that a little bit later. He said of Lauren, he said basically kept reiterating, well, you've got the right to petition for redress of grievances out on the sidewalk, that kind of thing, but if you do it in a government building, you should be prepared to pay the price. He said essentially, I respect your activism, what you're doing and everything, but you can't do it in a government building, and if you do, there's a price to be paid. It's civil disobedience. The prosecutor, Cancella, had a message of deterrence. He said he brought up the New Hampshire Underground, and he said he referred to, quote, the effect these people have. He demanded a 30-day sentence for the purpose of sending a message to the people of the New Hampshire Underground. He said, which of course is also, I call it nhfree.com, but that was what he called it. And he said that although Lauren herself is not violent, her actions could lead to someone else being violent at some point. I think it was the prosecutor who also said the fact that they disagree is not an issue. Disagreement is something that they all value, but at some point they have to learn. Kinsella, the prosecutor, said, quote, I'm not suggesting she's dangerous, unquote. But again, said she could inspire others to become dangerous. Judge Muirhead said, quote, I appreciate that your group values the right to protest, unquote. And then he sentenced Lauren to 15 days in jail for doing it in a government building. When she left, I asked Lauren if she had anything else to say to us, and she said, see you later. At this point, the trial ends, and shortly thereafter, Kat Canning's trial begins. She also is brought in a wheelchair because she's refusing to walk where they tell her. They ask her how she pleads, and she says, I'm not guilty. She says, I'm not guilty of working for an organization that tortures people and bombs things around the world, but a lot of people here are. At that point, Judge Muirhead said, well, I didn't vote for this president. I'm in the I'm in the judicial branch, not the executive branch. Attempted to distance himself from the kinds of bad things that Kat was talking about. Well, the prosecution hated this. They said, quote, her general demeanor strongly indicates, unquote, that she won't show up for a future trial. At some point in here, Judge Muirhead threatened Kat with 2 years in jail for some sort of, failure to appear thing. But I don't know if that has to do with what she actually did or with, or if that would just be something that would apply were she to sign bail and then break it. But anyway, he asked the prosecution and the marshals or something along those lines if they had informed Kat that one of these failure to appear offenses carries the maximum penalty of 2 years in jail. This edition of the Ridley Report is brought to you by NCC-1776 org. NCC-1776 org.